Happy Friday. Welcome to another Project Blue at Summer live chat. This week, we're excited to have Melodie Grubbs from USC Sea Grant join us. Sea and Sea Grant are partners in the Summer of STEM initiative, which is bringing science to the LAUSD, sponsored by the Mayor's Fund LA. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome, and we're glad you could join us. If you've joined us for previous live chats, we had it last week, but I'm just going to say it again. We have a different layout. We now have a Q&A function to ask questions, so be sure to use that instead of the chat box to ask any questions you might have for Melodie throughout her presentation. If you want to watch previous live chats or register for future ones, please go to altasea-project-blue.org/live-chats. Next week, our guest is Dr. Linda DeGuy, who is the director of the USC Sea Grant program. I'll put the link in the chat for your convenience so you can sign up. Now for our guest, Melodie Grubbs is a science research and policy specialist at USC Sea Grant. She is focused on helping communities prepare for and adapt to changing climate conditions, coastal hazards, and sea level rise. Today, Melodie's topic is beaches as buffers, sea level rise science to adaptation. Again, if you have any questions for Melodie during the chat, please send through the Q&A function located at the bottom of the window screen, and we will ask her during the Q&A session towards the end of the hour. Melodie, thank you for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you. Happy to be here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Right. And I'm going to swap presenter view real quick. All right, so good to go. So good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. Today I'm going to talk to you about sea level rise, beaches, and some of the solutions that we're looking for along our coastline. And so to kick this little talk off, I wanted to kind of gauge what everyone thought about sea level rise. And so if you go on your cell phone to www.menti.com and enter the code 474480, I want you to enter in the first 3 words that come to mind when you think of sea level rise.
Hey, Melodie.
Yeah?
Your screen is zoomed in still, so we can't see the
weird.
full screen. That happened again.
Okay, let's see what's happening here. Let me try to do a new share. How's that?
Looks great. Perfect.
Perfect? Okay, there we go. Yeah, not sure what's going on there. So I'll just give a little bit of time here. So we have some keywords coming in here, and this is just good to gauge what everyone's thinking about sea level rise. And so we have some really strong words like terrifying, water, beaches, flooding, a lot of unknown and questions, expensive. And so these are all great words. I'm glad beaches is coming in really strong there. Storms, climate change, rapid. So that's also a good one we'll talk about. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. Let's see if this will load. Oops, there you go. And so just to give you a little intro on USC Sea Grant, we're a federal state university partnership, and we integrate research, education, and outreach with a specific focus on the urban ocean and solving some of the issues that arise out of having so many people along the coastline and trying to manage our natural resources. We have a really high developed coastline in Los Angeles and in Southern California. And so we focus on some of these problems that you see here and issues, things like water quality, coastal management, sea level rise and coastal impacts, which I focus on. We also focus on marine protected areas, aquaculture and seafood, maritime affairs, and education and science literacy. And so today I want to talk to you about sea level rise and give a little bit of a primer before we go into talk about adaptation, and then talk about our beaches here in Los Angeles, which applies really to Southern California, and how we can use beaches as some of the solutions moving forward with adaptation. And so a little bit about sea level rise. Let's dig into this problem first. So along the Los Angeles coastline, well, really all coastlines of the world, sea level has been rising. We can see from this graph that it's rising. There's a line going up, an upwards trend. And this data was collected from NASA satellites, from space sensors to measure the height of the ocean. So on the bottom of the graph is time starting at 1993 to 2020 now. And on the left side of the graph is the height of the ocean in millimeters. And so what we're seeing here is a slope going up. And from this data, scientists can calculate the rate of change of the ocean level per year. And one thing that we've been finding in recent years is that rate is not a constant increase. That rate is actually increasing over time. And so what we're seeing is a faster rate of sea level rise. And so now that we know that the oceans are rising, let's talk about why. From this video, you can see that these are temperature anomalies in the world. And so due to climate change and global warming, we are seeing melting ice sheets and warming of the ocean. This video is from 1951 to 2000. And you can see that along the poles especially, you have this really high anomaly of temperature increase in these areas. And so with sea level rise, with climate change and global warming, what we're seeing is melting ice sheets and glaciers, and also the expansion of seawater as it warms. And so from this, this is a glacier melting or breaking off, iceberg B59, and this was just in February 11th, 2020. And this iceberg B49 breaking off the Pine Island Glacier is about a quarter of the size of the city of Los Angeles. And so this has been pretty much the normal and what's been happening over the years. And so here's another quick little Menti.com poll before we get into some of the sea level rise predictions. So here we have three options. Sea level in California is likely to be how much higher by 2050? I want you to take a guess, or maybe you know this already. We'll wait a few more seconds. And so right now, the poll is showing that the majority of attendees think that sea level rise in California is likely to be 1 to 3 feet higher by 2050. And then right behind that, we have 0 to 1 feet higher. And so the correct answer here is we're really looking at a 1 to 3 foot increase by 2050. There's some models that show about a 0.7 foot increase, and we'll show what this means for Los Angeles coastline. And so another important thing to consider when talking about sea level rise and our coasts is the impacts of storms and high tides. We like to say here at Sea Grant that today's storm is tomorrow's high tide, meaning that when we see wave run up and storms bringing water into the beach and eroding, we like to think about that this is what our coastline could look like in 50 to 100 years. And so overall, sea level rise, again, is increasing in rate, and storms and surges are predicted to have more pulses and more storms into the future. And so we have to take all these things into consideration when we're planning for sea level rise and when we're planning for adaptation projects along our coastline. Additionally, we have things like compounding stressors, precipitation, wildfire, human development, heat, groundwater, sediment management, and we have to consider all these things when we're talking about our coastline. And so when we think about a 1 or even a 3-foot increase in sea level rise, it doesn't seem like much, but when you add in a really high tide, which could be up to 7 feet, also known as a king tide, and then we add in waves from storm events, maybe another 5 feet, suddenly 3 feet becomes 15 feet. And that can cause some really major flooding in our low-lying areas along the coast. And so we've worked with scientists to help develop tools to help cities begin to plan for sea level rise and figure out solutions moving forward. And so one of the tools that we use is called the USGS, which is the United States Geological Survey Coastal Storm Modeling System, also known as COSMOS. Pretty cool name, right? And the COSMOS model uses climate predictions on a global scale, and it downsizes them to a regional scale, so they're very high resolution. And using these predictions, we're able to predict flood extent under a variety of different scenarios, say 1 foot of sea level rise, 2 feet, 3 feet, 5 feet, 10 feet, and figure out how these overlay on maps and how far water could potentially flood inland. And so this is an example for here in Santa Monica near the Marina del Rey and the Bayona wetlands of the outputs of this model under various different conditions. So this model is unique in that it also includes those waves from storm events that we talked about. And so considering what are the chances of a 20-year storm coming in or a 100-year storm event coming in combined with sea level rise. And so here we can see this is a 100-year storm event. So it's a storm that has a 1 in 100-year chance of happening. So it's a fairly big storm event combined with different scenarios of sea level rise. And what we can see is large portions of Venice flooding and even portions around the marina. And so using this model, organizations like the Ocean Protection Council have developed State of the California Sea Level Rise guidance. And so these are all tools to help cities and communities plan for sea level rise, because we need to have an understanding of the extent of flooding and the extent of sea level rise along our coast so that we can make proper decisions. And so here you can see this is what's the forecast. And this is very specific to Santa Monica Bay. The numbers here are in feet, and you can see that there's these likely ranges. There's these 1 in 200 chance ranges, which are kind of the medium high risk aversion. And then we also included an extreme risk aversion. And this accounts for extreme melting of ice sheets and glaciers. And so what we see here for Santa Monica is that up till 2050, we only have a high emissions scenario. And so this is a scenario that based on carbon dioxide and global warming that we have basically, we are on track to see at least 0.6 to 1.1 foot level, sea rise level. And there is no low emission scenario here. And so that's an important thing to note, because we were kind of locked into these rates going into 2050. And it's really important to figure out ways we can cut emissions so that we can see some of the lower emission scenarios on these charts past 2050. And so for high emissions scenario, 2050, we're looking at 0.6 to 0.1 on this higher end up to 2 feet. And then by 2100, we're looking at 1.5 to 3.3 under the high scenario, but then that drops to 0.9 to 2.3 for a low scenario, and potentially up to 10 feet with this high scenario. That's a lot of water. And so along the LA coastline, from basically Malibu down to Long Beach, we have about 74 miles of coastline. We have sandy beaches, which account for nearly 62% of the coastline. The coastline in general is very highly developed, but we do have a lot of historic dune systems that were once present and some remnant dune systems from those systems. And Los Angeles County beaches are some of the most recognizable and popular in the world. We have a really high economic value here for our beaches, attracting more than 65 million visitors per year. That's a lot of visitors. But with rising sea level and more storms, we can expect more coastal erosion. This is an area heading up towards Malibu. And even with king tides, we can expect more flooding. This is flooding in Florida from a king tide. I like this picture because the dog looks like he's contemplating either swimming or he's not sure what's happening. And here, this is also in Los Angeles. And so some of the things we've been doing historically and even now to deal with these king tide events and increased flooding is building temporary berms like this. So there's seasonal berms during the winter when we have more storms to protect flooding from parking lots, roads, and some residences. This is a major undertaking with tractors, and it's a lot of movement of sand. Oops. Oh, that slide wasn't working, so that's okay. And so sea level is happening now, we know that, right? And the rate of sea level rise is increasing. And here in Los Angeles, what that means is that up to 60% of our beaches in LA County could be gone by 2100. And this is a table from the Los Angeles County Department of Beaches and Harbors Sea Level Rise Vulnerability Assessment using the Cosmos model. So this is an application of some of that science that we talked about earlier. And so you can see too that the beaches here are very dynamic, they're very variable, and so the rates of change are different depending on the flood extent that's predicted with these models. And so what can we expect? We can expect waves and run up from the waves, reaching higher elevations and extending further inland. We can expect increased erosion of beaches, also the risk of bluff failures for some of those areas that have residences developed on top of the bluff. We'll see more coastal flooding with higher surges, permanent inundation of perhaps natural habitat, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes wetlands can serve as buffers as well. Reduced capacity to absorb runoff coming down the roads, saltwater intrusion into coastal groundwater, and we can expect all of this to be worse with some of those higher ends of sea level rise scenarios. So I stress that as an importance because there are lower ends of sea level rise that are predicted, but those require major alterations in our day-to-day business and how we are releasing carbon emissions. And so I like to use historic photos as kind of a reference to what our coastlines look like in the past and what they look like now. This is a section of Broad Beach in Malibu, which is an area that has been having extreme challenges with flooding and beach erosion. And you can see here that these are kind of some remnants of natural dune systems and then highly developed line of residences right alongside the beach. So these are very low-lying elevation. And nowadays, it looks more like this. We have this rock revetment that was put up to try to help prevent flooding, and we have a really rapid erosion of the beach. And so this is a pretty drastic change. And so when we talk about sea level rise and living shoreline projects and beaches, which I'll get to here shortly, some of the need to explore projects like this is one, because of sea level rise. Two, El Niños here on the coast can worsen West Coast flooding. We have more storm events and the water level is generally higher. Most of our flooding here in Los Angeles and in the Southern California in general happens in the winter with these increasing storms. And solutions aren't simple. In the US, over 25 million people live near the ocean. And in California alone, we have over $100 billion worth of property along the coast. There are also a lot of ecosystems at risk, things like wetlands and coastal lagoons. And so the clock is really ticking. Coastal communities already experience major flood events, and 2/3 of Southern California beaches are on track to disappear. But it's not all doom and gloom, right? So organizations like Sea Grant and other, we call them boundary spanning organizations that work with coastal communities and bring science to communities, have developed this kind of science to adaptation process where we take best available science like the Cosmos model, we use interactive tools, we bring in experts in coastal processes, and we also monitor environmental changes, and we work with communities and stakeholders, meaning people like LA County Beaches and Harbors or the City of Manhattan Beach to help, and even universities to help bring all these people at the table and come up with solutions. And this has resulted in a lot of planning and assessment using these Cosmos models to develop sea level rise vulnerability assessments to identify areas along our coastline that are most vulnerable to sea level rise. And then once we have that kind of information, cities can start to develop adaptation plans or find the solutions to these problems. And so when we bring science to communities, we talk about bringing technical support, these models, bringing regional models, identifying potential partnerships and stakeholders, hosting collaborations and workshops, communicating science in a way that people can understand it and different audiences can understand it, and also educating, starting when at super young age to like some of the older folks in the community. And so when we talk about adaptation along our coastline, how do we adapt to sea level rise? I like to use this spectrum. This is basically a green to gray adaptation spectrum. And on the left-hand side, you'll see this green side, which is very nature-based, which I'll talk about more today. And then you have structure-based on the right, which are things like jetties, seawalls, concrete structures, breakwaters, or rocks and revetments. With nature-based, you have more vegetation and natural habitats. It could be things like dunes, wetlands, eelgrass beds, oyster reefs. And in between those, there's this kind of hybrid approach where you can maybe have concrete and riprap underneath with a dune built on top. And so these are some of the projects happening here in Southern California. And it's important to note that some of these nature-based solutions really look at trying to retain sand and on the beach and retain that kind of sand accretion. And oftentimes when you have seawalls put in, they can accelerate the beach loss, but they're often a kind of a last-ditch effort to try and protect whatever's on the other side from flooding. And so adaptation through living shorelines. Living shorelines aim to stabilize shorelines. They reduce erosion, provide valuable habitat that can enhance coastal resilience. But it's important to note that the shorelines here in California are very dynamic. We have case-by-case solutions, or perhaps we need a combination of solutions that one solution at one beach might not work on another area of beach. And so why a living shoreline approach? People love the beach, and so we want to try to keep the beach, right? Gray solutions can often accelerate erosion, but in a certain setting, they might be the most appropriate. But nature-based solutions, they're often also cheaper than gray solutions. They can provide ecosystem benefits, and they can also increase climate resiliency. This is a photo of a nature-based solution in the form of dunes implemented on a beach in Cardiff, California. So historically, this beach was really susceptible to flooding, and this was an attempt to try and use dunes and beaches as a buffer from sea level rise. This is another historic photo for those of you familiar with the Santa Monica and Venice area. It's a photo of Ocean Park Beach and the homes that are built there facing south towards Venice. And you can see in the background that there's these remnant dune systems still present because there's not much development. This is in the early 1900s. And when we look at that photo and we look at some of the other science that's come out of studying the different types of habitats along, or historical habitats along Southern California's coastline, this one effort from the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project and a couple other partners used 1857 year T-sheet maps of Southern California to digitize different habitats. And from this, we found that there was 3,281 acres of beach and nearly 4,000 acres of dunes present in Southern California. That's from Santa Barbara to San Diego. So that's a lot of historical dune system that was once present that we aren't really used to seeing when we go out to the beach now. Here you can see around El Segundo and the LAX airport. This was part of the El Segundo Dunes complex system, and this was one of the largest contiguous dune systems historically in California. And there's a large section, still about 300 acres, still present to this day in front of the airport. And so when we talk about vegetated dunes, they can really serve as buffers. And this little figure shows that dunes can grow over time. And they do that by having these native vegetation species that are made to grow on dunes, that grow in this coastal strand environment. They grow, they are formed in a way that wind-driven sand bumps into the leaves and the flowers, and it gets trapped and it falls to the ground. And over time, you see these small dunes form little hummocks and then grow to bigger dunes over time. And so the vegetation helps in natural dune recovery. It can aid in long-term stabilization, and it can kind of keep pace with sea level rise over time. And so these are some of the projects and nature-based solutions that are being investigated right now along our coastline. And so this is a picture in Santa Monica. Is this a groomed beach versus a natural beach? And you know, when you go to the beach, most people are used to these really raked and flat beaches here in California, but naturally they're not actually like that. And you know, for a lot of us, that's all we've known. And when you go to the East Coast, you see dunes that are being actively used as flooding, protecting, and buffers. They also get a lot more hurricanes and storm surges over there. But it's a similar concept that we're exploring here. What happens when we let a natural beach flourish? And so I'm going to talk about a few different projects happening here along our coastline. And some of them are as simple as changing management strategies. Here's another photo of Cardiff Dune Restaurant. It's a Cardiff Living Shoreline project in San Diego. And so when we think of these projects, we also note that they have a lot of benefits to wildlife and people. This is a photo of the Santa Monica Beach Restoration Pilot Project. It was the first kind of nature-based living shoreline approach implemented on the beach here in Los Angeles. And it's in Santa Monica, kind of adjacent to the Annenberg Community Beach House. And it was an area that looked kind of like that previous picture, raked and very flat. And what happened here was sand fencing was installed, and the area was seeded with native coastal strand vegetation. And over time, what we've seen is this growing of, there's more vegetation on the beach because it's not being raked anymore, and also little small dunes and hummocks forming over time. And so when we think about these wildlife and human use values, we want to enhance, there's a lot of benefits with these projects, right? We can enhance the image of this developed coastline. We can help familiarize people with nature and natural beaches. We can promote tourism based on environmental values. We can also provide shorebird habitat to a lot of critically listed species here in Los Angeles, like this western snowy plover and this adorable little chick. When we implemented the Santa Monica Beach Restoration Pilot Project, only 4 months later, we had this rare bird nest on Santa Monica, on this beach inside the restoration project. And this bird has, while it's overwintered here and been seen here, it hasn't nested here in Los Angeles in over 70 years. And so that was a big accomplishment, meaning that if we build some of these ecosystems and these nature-based and living shoreline projects, that we can help out some wildlife as well. And what we've found also is that these projects have really low to no impact on existing recreational uses of the beach. Here are a few photos of some of the features that you see in living shorelines. We have plants that have really pretty flowers like the beach evening primrose and sand verbena. And then these beaches also provide wrack, which can be composed of algae, giant kelp, seaweed, and this wrack provides a lot of forage and food for some of the shorebirds and species that use the site. And so here's a map of some of the projects happening. We talked about the Santa Monica Beach project right here, and there's a few others happening in Los Angeles as well to keep an eye out for. The Santa Monica Beach Restoration Pilot Project, that was a partnership with the Bay Foundation, City of Santa Monica, the EPA, and with state and local support. And this project had a goal, it has a 3-acre footprint, but it had a goal of providing a demonstration site, so being the first of its kind so that we could learn from it. And since then, we've had 3 other projects kind of spur up in Los Angeles. And so we have learned from this project. And additionally, in 2019, the city of Santa Monica passed an $800 million climate action plan that includes options to potentially scale up nature-based solutions and build dunes for the entirety of the coastline there. So that's a big deal. These projects are all informed by scientific monitoring because they're pilot projects and we want to be able to understand how these projects work. So there's a very big science aspect to these projects and data collection aspect. Here we have 2 transects, they're elevation transects in the Santa Monica Beach Restoration Pilot Project site. And over time, what we've seen is up to a meter in dune, or basically growth of the beach and elevation of the beach over time, which is really quite astonishing. In areas that we've collected data for control sites, meaning areas outside of the project site, we have not seen these kinds of changes, and in some cases seen even a decrease in elevation. And so this is really important because we want to see an increase in elevation because that is what protects against flooding. And so here you can also see with that site vegetation data being collected over time, and we've seen an increase in vegetation cover on the site over time, which is also very positive. And then I'll quickly jump to another site in southern, or it's down in San Diego. It's called the Cardiff Living Shoreline Project, and this site was had a hybrid kind of living shoreline approach applied to it, and it was an area that was already experiencing pretty severe flooding. You can see from these photos, this is Highway 1, and so during king tides and storm events, this area was flooding, and so something really had to be done to address this flooding and kind of save the highway. And so this approach took cobble and it took large rocks and it dug down and it built this kind of secure, stable, hard structure, and it built a dune on top of it. And so you can see here from the photo, this is quite a big ditch with rocks in it. The people there are for scale. And now it looks like this. This is an aerial shot of the site. So it's pretty beautiful, and it's providing habitat for a lot of different species, and it's protecting the road against flooding. And so because these projects are very demonstration and pilot projects, and we haven't implemented a lot of them on our coastline, they're very big adaptive management and monitoring components. Things like we will rebuild the dunes if they flood 2 times within a 5-year period, or if they wash out the highway 3 out of the 5 years of monitoring. And so these things are kind of built into the project so that we can evaluate how effective and also take action if we need to do something else. And so quickly, I'll talk about a few projects and then we'll wrap it up. So coming to a beach near you. I really like this little comic because it is representative of the field I work in. It says, here's the shore. It says, I'll meet you at high tide. So the shore is always changing. And we have the Malibu Living Shoreline Project, which is another nature-based project happening in LA County. And this is a partnership with the Bay Foundation, the LA County Beaches and Harbors, and the city of Malibu. And it's a project to enhance some of the existing dune footprint and build out a little bit at Zuma and Westward Beach. And so this is a really interesting site because Zuma Beach gets over 5 million visitors per year, which is a lot of foot traffic. And so it provides also an opportunity to have all these beach visitors learn about these projects and what they are. There's the Los Angeles Living Shoreline Project, which is in planning. And this one's an innovative multi-habitat living shoreline that has a beach restoration project component similar to Santa Monica, but it also includes a bluff restoration component in the back area. And then directly adjacent out into the water, it includes a pilot eelgrass transplant plot. And so this is also in the planning and in works. And then lastly, we have the Manhattan Beach Dune Restoration Project, which is 3 acres of back beach dune restoration on an existing dune footprint in Manhattan Beach. And so this project has removal of invasive species and installation of native species and strategic fencing to promote dune growth. And so some of the challenges for living shoreline projects, we have a really highly developed coastline. So these projects require a lot of partners, a lot of planning, a lot of permitting, and a lot of community involvement. We also have very altered sand budgets, dams and channels, like channeling Ballona Creek, armoring our cliffs. These all alter where sand comes from and the sand budget. And so those need to be taken into consideration. And we also have a need for these pilot projects, case-by-case solutions and cohesive monitoring. And lastly, we need kind of community support and local government support to be able to kick these projects off the ground and find funding for them. And so what can you do? Well, less CO2 equals less sea level rise. And so you saw those 2050 scenarios with the high emissions sea level rise kind of locked in. But after that, there are different rates of sea level rise that are possible, but those all depend on kind of our trajectory with CO2 emissions. You can also learn about natural beaches and dunes. You can become a coastal scientist and help solve some of these problems. You can record how your coastline is changing. And then you can also get involved in these projects and tell your family and friends. And so I think with that, we're going to go ahead and start some questions. Again, don't forget to check out the live chat next week with Dr. Linda Duguay. She's a USC Sea Grant director. She'll be talking about USC's Wrigley Marine Science Center on Santa Catalina Island and some of the research going on there. So I'm going to stop share and we'll start to address some of these questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melodie. That was awesome. Perfect. Okay, so if anyone has questions for Melodie, the Q&A function's at the bottom, and we have quite a few already. So if you have any, feel free to ask. So you ready to dive right in?
Yeah.
Okay, so this one came in about midway through, and it's a pretty simple one. Just what is the definition of a dune?
Yeah, so a dune is basically a pile of sand, right? And so we have coastal dune systems and we have inland dune systems. And so it's a feature of the sand on the beach. When I talk about dunes in this presentation, they're mainly coastal dune systems. And dunes can be quite complex. The dunes that I was showing you are very dynamic kind of foredunes. They're areas that are exposed to really harsh ocean conditions. And so the vegetation that grows there is really quite special in that it can even survive in those conditions with high winds and lots of salt content. And then for some of these historical dune systems, and other areas of California have them as well, the further you move inland, the more stabilized dunes become. And so you see generally a larger cover of vegetation, maybe some different plant species, and so maybe even different wildlife using them.
Okay, good. So that kind of brings to another question that something we were talking about beforehand. What are some of the biggest dune systems in LA County, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, in LA County, probably the largest remnant coastal dune system is going to be right in front of LAX airport. And it's part of the El Segundo Dunes complex. And currently, most of it is closed off to the public. It's owned by the city of Los Angeles, but there are opportunities for restoration events there and things like that, a lot of which the Bay Foundation runs. And so I would urge you to go check those out. But you know, even when you visit the beach in some areas, you can see little pockets of dunes and kind of evidence that dune systems were there. Maybe, you know, some plants sprouting up that are native, and those were probably left over from some of these larger dune systems historically.
Interesting. So with that, we had a couple questions regarding real estate. So Harry asked, are real estate developers adjusting their approaches in response to rising sea levels? And then Lance asked a little bit kind of the same one. What is the outlook for the Southern California real estate market, like Malibu with multi-million-dollar homes on the beaches? Will they eventually be condemned? And if so, when? Also, is the California government taking action to restrict coastal development and take over coastal lands and homes from private parties?
Yeah, that's a very complicated and great question. And it really brings to mind one of the other adaptation strategies that is being discussed, but people are a little bit scared about. And that strategy is called managed retreat. And managed retreat basically means that we should consider in some areas maybe moving back or stopping development or relocating structures to be further away from that shoreline. And so this is something, you know, Sea Grant is involved with, but it's a very complicated subject that involves both local policy and state policy, maybe even some federal policy, and has so far been worked on in kind of a case-by-case basis, things, areas like Broad Beach or areas like the Long Beach Peninsula. And it's going to be one of those conversations that is going to be happening more often. I think that's all I have to say on that subject. But it is something that needs to be talked about and is being discussed.
Gotcha. Okay, so we have a couple on the same topic a little bit. So this has to do with what you said on your last slides, which was, how do we measure the coastline without, you know, any of the fancy equipment that researchers or foundations might have? Like, how does one go about doing that?
Yeah, so, you know, here at USC Sea Grant, we have a program called it's Urban Tides, and it's basically an app that you can download or use off a web browser on your phone, and it allows you to take kind of geotagged photos of different areas of the coastline. And so we urge people to use this app during these really high king tide events, but even really low tide events, so that we can kind of become more aware of how the coastline is changing. Because scientists have all these really neat and nifty tools, but we're not out there every day. And so for people who live along the coastline, it's really important to get that kind of information, and there's a huge opportunity to do so.
Gotcha.
Again, I think one thing I want to mention too along that line is that there are a lot of really innovative low-cost technologies coming out and ways to involve the community more. And so things like low-cost water level gauges or drones even are some of the cool new features coming out.
Gotcha. Okay, so kind of on that same subject. So we have a couple high school teachers in here. They want to know, what would one do for, if they were interested in this field, wanted to learn more? Are there volunteer opportunities? Ned wants to know how you volunteer along the Los Angeles Living Shoreline projects, and any notable internship experiences that you had that led you to where you are today.
Yeah, so I had a really interesting career trajectory. I started off in meteorology and focusing on climate science, and then moved in, and I found out really quickly that I wanted to be involved in more of this active role of being involved in things that result in change, right? And addressing some of these real world problems. And so for some of these students in high school, you know, if you want to study and be a coastal scientist or study the coastal habitat, there's such a range of opportunities available. You know, before going to college, you could volunteer with local nonprofits. You could look into some of these programs and restoration projects happening along the coast, and see if there's opportunities to help out with outreach, or lead field trips, or participate in removing some invasive species or maintaining the site. Even things like going to the beach and picking up trash are really awesome and result in change. In terms of the fields to study, there's a wide range of opportunities. You could focus on biology and do marine biology, or you could focus on ecology and how to manage our coastlines. I focused in grad school on GIS and mapping and how that applies to our coastline, because it's such a big component. And so there's really all kinds of fields that you can look into.
Awesome. So we had talked about this earlier, and as promised, Ryan has asked what your favorite ocean is. Every time, he's a longtime listener.
I got worried about this question. I like to think of the ocean as one ocean, right? I do love all components of the ocean. I mean, because I live in Los Angeles, I'm very connected to the ocean here. We have some amazing underwater habitats, things like kelp forests and eelgrass beds, and even I love even exploring some of the shipwrecks along our coast, which are really awesome. And I did my undergrad in Hawaii, and so I think really my love of the ocean was solidified there because it was the tropics, it was warm water, you didn't have to wear a wetsuit to go surfing. And you know, there's so much cool wildlife. And one of the reasons I got into this field was that even my 7 years spent in Hawaii and working on research vessels and traveling in the ocean, like I would go back to the same spots, you know, to go surf, and I could visibly see the change in terms of things like coral reef bleaching. And so some of these changes, you know, we just have to be more aware and want to learn and understand what's going on. But things are changing very fast, and if you know, if we look and we kind of observe, we can understand more.
Got it. Okay, so we got a couple more. So Ashley asks, as more natural vegetation projects are being started, is there any effort to add in additional features to these projects, such as educational plaques or possible QR codes to conduct citizen science to collect data and monitor progress and inform the general public?
Yes, definitely. And there's such a huge opportunity as more of these projects get started to really use them as education opportunities. And so a lot of the projects have interpretive signage. We work with organizations like the Audubon Society or local schools to develop field trips and some curriculum. And really, if we didn't leverage these projects to reach a wider audience, especially youth, we're missing out on a huge opportunity, because sea level rise and coastal changes are issues that we're going to deal with for a long time. And it's really important, you know, that future generations are aware of these projects so that they can be maintained over time, or so they can develop better solutions and improve, you know, some of these projects.
Okay, so Jenny asks, does Sea Grant have projects at Cabrillo Beach?
Hi, Jenny. Not that I know of, but Sea Grant is involved in a lot of the kind of tide pool monitoring over there, and some collaborating with some other researchers. But if you're open to having the next project at Cabrillo Beach, we should talk.
Kind of skipping back to the last one, we just had a question come in. What is the app that you mentioned, an app that allows you to send photos of the beaches to scientists to track that? What is that app called?
Yeah, that app is called Urban Tides, and it's an app that we developed here at Sea Grant and are constantly improving. And I can go ahead and put the link to that website with the information in the chat so that folks who are interested can check it out.
Perfect. So while you're doing that, could you talk a little bit? We had Bill wants to know if there are any local examples of beach coastline stabilization projects in the water, such as shellfish or kelp restoration projects that you are aware of.
Yes, and so, you know, I focused on beaches and dunes today, but living shoreline applies to a lot of other different methods, and that includes those that you mentioned: eelgrass beds, oyster reefs, rocky reef, kelp habitat, and these are being explored. There's kelp restoration off Palos Verdes, trying to restore habitat. In Newport Bay, there's efforts to evaluate oyster beds combined with eelgrass beds. And so, you know, like I said, the coastlines are very dynamic here, and not one idea is not the whole solution. And so a lot of different kind of methods are being evaluated, and combinations of methods.
Gotcha. Okay, so Lance asks, let me read through this. Can you talk about the effects of a man-made structures like Jedi's Marina that affect the beach and or change of sand distribution? For example, the beach at the Horseshoe at Redondo Beach Pier that is new, basically gone. but I used to enjoy it as a kid, and that's now a restricted beach. Was that loss of beach affected by development or just normal sea rise?
You know, I'd have to look into the kind of history there, but I will say in general, hard structures can definitely alter the natural movement of sand. And so, you know, a lot of times scientists try to use modeling, kind of high resolution modeling, to inform the installation of some of these projects, outweighing, you know, the flood risk versus the desire to keep the beach. But zooming back from that, when I had a slide in there that talked about high development and some of the problems that we're facing, it's not just about beach erosion. It's that we've altered where our sand comes from by channelizing and cement lining, you know, some of the major creeks that flow out of our watersheds and bring sand to the coast, or bring sediment to the coastline, which then kind of crumbles down into sand. We also have this kind of longshore transport of sand down the coastline, down south, and that's been altered by the development of marinas, some of the bigger ports, and things like jetties and even piers. And so, you know, a further study would probably have to be done there, but it's quite possible that it's a combination of both rising waters, increased storm events, and high development of the coastline.
Gotcha. Okay, so Harry asks, generally over time, have you seen increased or decreased interest on a federal level in protecting coastal communities from sea level rise?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in my lifetime, I have definitely seen an increase in federal level on protecting coastal communities. It is a hot topic right now, right? We have a lot of people that live along the coastline, and the models are pretty solid. You know, they're becoming more and more accurate. We know with more probability that certain levels of sea level rise will happen in the future. And you know, while there has been an increase in this federal level, what is really inspiring to me and provides kind of hope for the future is that on a local level is what's really required to take action, right? So a lot of cities have their own kind of local coastal management plans, their climate adaptation plans. And so a lot of these projects, they're spearheaded kind of from the ground up, rising because there was a need from citizens to, and that live in the community, you know, to do something about their changing coastline or identify problems like my beach is eroding. What should we do? Let me go talk to city council and find out what, you know, my local government is doing.
Gotcha. And if anyone's interested, we just hosted a webinar on Wednesday with Congresswoman Nanette Barragan. She's the representative for the 44th district, so that includes the Port of Los Angeles area. We just hosted one on her new bill in Congress that deals with climate and the ports and all of that. So the recording should be available shortly at the website I posted. I'll post it again at the end. But be sure keep a lookout for that. It was a really good hour-long conversation with her about that. So that has to do with the federal level. I had to throw that in there. So we're almost out of time, but do you have any, I guess you kind of gave it, but any final advice for anyone that feels pretty passionately about this and wants to see what it's all about? Internship opportunities, I think you mentioned a couple, but any words of encouragement for them?
Yeah, I think, you know, just do some research. You can check out USC Sea Grant's website. If you just Google USC Sea Grant online, it'll take you to our website. I can also post it here. Well, it's actually near I did post it with the Urban Tides. But we have a wealth of resources on that website for all kind of age ranges, whether you're thinking about studying this field and serious about you know, getting involved, or you're a teacher looking for some cool curriculum to show some of your younger classes. There's all kinds of resources there.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, we are running. One more question, we just got it. Oh gosh, lost it. Came in the chat. what is the what are some tools that you guys use, like the big sciencey tools that you guys use to measure this stuff on a bigger level, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, you know, some of those sea level rise graphs that I was showing you were from sensors attached on satellites in space, which is like mind blowing. That's crazy, right? But some of the tools that I personally like to use and I'm really interested is kind of this new era of low cost technologies, things like drones to collect elevation data, things like ROVs to collect bathymetry data and explore some of these underwater habitats. We also look into collaborating with partners on things like low cost water level sensors so that cities can kind of take charge of their own data collection and figure out how their water level is changing in, you know, their backyard. I'm really into mapping and using kind of some of these geospatial tools because maps and visualizations can really tell a lot and they can be really useful when translating some of the science to the community and local planners because you can see it, right? And then we also kind of tinker around with these augmented reality and virtual reality visualizations because they can also be very impactful when you see a place that you're very familiar with, that you had visited, you know, as a child, keep visiting today, and then you suddenly see that place inundated with 3 feet of water in a storm condition. That can be very motivating to want to do something about this problem and be part of the solution.
Got it. Well, I think that wraps it up for questions. I just want to remind everyone that we have another live chat next in 2 Fridays from now. So August 28th, and it is with Dr. Linda DeGay, who is the director of the US Sea Grant program and director of research for the Wrigley Institute for Environmental Studies at USC. She's going to be talking about the USC's Wrigley Marine Science Center on Santa Catalina Island, a brief history of it, and an overview of current research and education programs. So I'm going to post the link right now in the chat in case you guys want to sign up. We'll love to see you there again. But yeah, Melodie, thank you so much. This has been awesome. We had a lot of really good questions. So thanks again. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks everyone for checking this out on a Friday afternoon. Hope everyone enjoys the weekend.
Yeah, happy weekend, everyone.
Yeah.
Talk to you.